Ubisoft is a company I have a love-hate relationship with. Many years ago, probably for generations it felt like, from the PS2, PS3 generation, the PS4 generation, they were killing it. They were on a Undertaker undefeated streak type of run. Up until 2017, people could point back at stuff before that, the whole downgrade gate debacle with multiple games, Rainbow Six Siege, Watch Dogs being two biggest ones. You look at where Rainbow Six is today, people still love that game. That franchise has community with Siege, and that's one thing people may or may not give Ubisoft enough credit for. They don't give up on their multiplayer titles. But the turning point where this love-hate relationship I started to have with Ubisoft, they released Ghost Recon Wildlands, an open world Ghost Recon game, which I was looking forward to, a lot of people was looking forward to. The concept of an open world Ghost Recon game blew my mind for the time. And when the game came out, it was dog. There may have been some redeemable qualities the game had with the gameplay, with how you can make yourself look cool in the game, but apart from that, it was not it. But then that same year, they released a banger with Assassin's Creed Origins, arguably the best RPG creed that they released out of all the RPG creeds, and it felt like a breath of fresh air. And it's something that felt new, it's something that felt different. It took people over by storm, selling over 10 million copies. That's where the love started to show with Ubisoft. They followed that up next year with a remaster to Assassin's Creed Rogue. I would wish that Ubisoft was to deliver a type of game like that where you're playing as a Templar. I would love the heck out of another game where you get to play as their side to get their perspective, because it kind of helps you understand the whole Templar assassin war isn't black and white, it's mostly gray, where you do see certain shit get fucked up when the assassins come about, and the Templars are like, look, we need to protect these because every time that they show up, shit happens. And it kind of leads to questions about morality when it comes to both sides of the fence with the Templars and assassins respectively. And not too much long later, they released Far Cry 5, which I felt like was great. I love the non-linear aspect of just tackling different things in your own way. You played as a custom character who didn't speak, which I didn't mind. Story-wise was amazing. You have the real-life inspiration from the cult that was in Texas. And the way the game ends, with you literally driving around in a nuke sequence, you're trying to run away from literal nuclear bombs. Like, it's something that if gaming was at a place where it's at now back in the 80s, it would have probably terrified people.
Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour.
And then they released the Crew 2. Crew 2 was very mediocre, a game that was very grindy for what it was. And when you try to play the game, it felt too easy. It felt on rails. There was no sense of speed. Like, the progression was nice. The customization was great. And to me, it was nothing more than a cheap version of Forza Horizon, just without the soul. And then they released Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I thought was pretty good, but it wasn't as good as Origins. The open world felt very bloated, felt very checklist-like. It had redeemable qualities. The story was great. The RPG mechanics I loved. It was something that it felt like we were lacking from other RPGs like Mass Effect Andromeda. And it did have like a goofy thing where they made Cassandra the canonical choice, which if that was going to be the case all along, Cassandra should have been the main character. But I forget Ubisoft was at that place where they were like, women in video games don't sell. And then they came out with Far Cry New Dawn, which was a spin-off sequel to Far Cry 5. I thought that game was mediocre. I almost dropped that game. It was some of the light RPG mechanics for the time it made sense. Taking place after the nuclear bomb ending, which was canon because Far Cry typically never played with the lore. Then their next big release, they came out with Division 2, which the gameplay was pretty nice, but it gets boring and repetitive over time. It lacked a story. All it had was CGI cutscenes with the factions. The open world for that game left a lot more to be desired because it's just, oh, go here, clear out a checkpoint. It was just so repetitive, and it was one of them games that you can only play in spurts and not try to beat to completion. It did make up for it with some loot and making yourself look like a cool character, but other than that, really not that many redeemable qualities. Then they came out with Ghost Recon Breakpoint, a game that made me reach my breaking point with the Ghost Recon IP, and it made me realize that this franchise lacks an identity more than ever with the arbitrary RPG mechanics that they added. And then we move on to the next generation, the 2020s, where we have these brand new consoles, the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 respectively. Watch Dogs Legion, a game that I was really looking forward to, it fell flat. It was a god-awful game, the worst in the franchise. The gameplay was pretty nice for what it was. The story I liked, honestly. The whole play as anyone mechanic was a better concept on paper and not so much in execution, but all around just a god-awful game. But they did kind of get a big W when they came out with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I thoroughly loved. I thought it was better than Odyssey. It addressed a lot of issues that Odyssey had in terms of the RPG aspect of it being grindy and level gated. It didn't feel like I had to do everything in the open world just to progress through the story. I love the gameplay. It made me feel like this brutal badass Viking. Even though you wasn't an assassin, you were a mercenary for hire for the assassins, and it had some issues with the story per se. Like, you go through the motions of learning to be an assassin, but you never fully become one. And honestly, I feel like the open world content, the side quests, the stuff to do, it was very interesting and I loved it. The optional bosses were great. It had some game breaking bugs here and there where you couldn't even really get to certain bosses or complete certain bosses. Overall, I thought it was a pretty good game. In my opinion, I put it over Odyssey, mostly due to that game being a breath of fresh air for the series for its time. And then they came out with Immortals Phoenix Rising, which they had a sequel canned to this game because it sounded like Ubisoft didn't know what to do with it, considering that it had positive reception. A game that I thought honestly was a breath of fresh air, especially from an open world standpoint, where everything in that open world for it felt meaningful. Everything you did had a meaning. If you want to get stronger, go out and explore. The story was great. I liked the protagonist. The boss fights were amazing. The puzzles were very Zelda inspired. I loved everything about that game. May have had a couple issues here and there, but overall, I thought it was a great game. And they followed that game up with releasing Far Cry 6, which a game that I was hyped for. I was hyped to the moon and back. Everything was shaping up to look like to be a good game. You casted freaking Giancarlo Esposito as the main bad guy, which he had a historical track record of being a great villain. And I thought that's what we were going to get. I mean, he was a great villain for the most part of the game, but I ended up dropping it because the gameplay, it had too many RPG mechanics infused with this. The story for it, I thought was cool, but the biggest reason why I dropped it wasn't even the gameplay. It was the open world, and when I would pan out, I'd be like, oh my God, it's this huge. Like, and it felt like Assassin's Creed Odyssey all over again in terms of bloat, and I just didn't want to do that. Not to mention how bullet spongy all the enemies felt like, making all the enemies feel very difficult to kill, even if you have a shotgun. First and only Far Cry game I actually dropped. Actually, they came out with the Crew Motorfest, a game that I really wasn't checking for, but because they offered like a free demo trial version of it, I wanted to get my hands on it early. And honestly, I liked it. It was the best we were going to get from a Crew video game. I thought it was at least a step up from their previous entry with the Crew 2. Like, it actually felt like it had a sense of speed and progression with this. To give Ivory Tower his flowers for that game, it was pretty decent. Then this same year, they came out with Assassin's Creed Mirage, another game that I was very excited about. A game gamers were clamoring for, saying Ubisoft needs to go back to traditional Assassin's Creed, OG Assassin's Creed that we know and love. They did that, and it managed to still sell 5 million copies, but I guess because it didn't sell over 10 million, Ubisoft didn't find the need to brag about them numbers. But it was a great Assassin's Creed game. Arguably, I would put Mirage over the other RPG Creeds, over Valhalla, over Odyssey, and put it up there with Origins. It was that fucking good in my opinion. And even though like it had an issue of a great starting point with the story, but then the story kind of taking a back seat for the non-linear approach of gameplay, which the gameplay with the game was amazing. It felt like an old school Assassin's Creed game that fans wanted. Even though the story didn't pick up till the second half of the game, which it was fucking wild, I still had a fun time with the game, and the amazing gameplay made up for the story kind of starting to take a back seat. Then by the end of last year, they came out with the Avatar game, which honestly I thought was mid as hell. It had redeemable qualities in terms of the moment-to-moment gameplay, specifically the combat. It felt like an alien Far Cry game, which was the hype around it, funny enough, and it felt more like a Far Cry game than Far Cry 6 did. And I kept thinking to myself, why didn't Far Cry 6 play like that? But the open world and story, I really didn't care about. Like, they try to make you care about certain things that happen through certain high points, but it fell flat. The open world I didn't care about apart from liberating the outpost, which it felt rewarding and it felt like something you had to do because of this whole plot like revolving around, oh, you got to stop the pollution from going on in the world. Very kind of reminiscent of what you see in real life when it comes to the global warming conversations. It was still like all around a decent game. It could have been much better than what it was. Let me know what y'all think about this in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.